I have recently written an article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled, UK Unveils Lethal Challenger 3, Failing to Learn Lessons from Ukraine. The Challenger 3 is the UK's new main battle tank. And I wrote an article about it to clear up some of the deliberately created misconceptions some people might have reading the various announcements over the past month regarding this, again, new tank. And it's ironic because this supposedly new tank is actually just a refurbished, modernized Challenger 2 tank. And we just heard people across the Western media, Western commentators and analysts talking about Russia and its refurbished, modernized tanks, trying to diminish the significance of the large numbers of modernized tanks Russia is producing. And now they're proudly unveiling this tank, which is essentially the same thing, refurbished and modernized. So let me read through this article. As I always do, I will add additional context when and if necessary, and I will show you the articles that I am referencing throughout my article. The United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense announced that the UK's most lethal tank has rolled off the production line. The same statement would claim that British Army soldiers are one step closer to getting their hands on one of Europe's most lethal tanks, the Challenger 3. Well, considering the track record of European main battle tanks, say, in Ukraine, that is not saying much. However, let's look first at this is government.gov.uk. UK's most lethal tank rolls off the production lines. Again, the links to all of these articles will be in the video description below. You can see it. It looks essentially like a Challenger 2 because it is a Challenger 2. It's an updated Challenger 2. However, with few exceptions, the details of the Challenger 3 main battle tank, produced under a nearly $990 million contract with Rheinmetall BAE Systems, provides only the latest example of Western military-industrial production, emphasizing profit over purpose and demonstrating that the British government and armed forces have failed to learn key lessons from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Now, we'll get into all of that here in just a moment. Let's talk about how the Challenger 3 isn't really new. While the initial announcement and price tag suggest the Challenger 3 is a newly produced tank, it is in fact the refurbishment and modernization of existing Challenger 2 tanks. So I reference this BBC article right here, UK's most lethal tank enters testing. Very similar headlines, almost like the BBC is just an extension of the British government, almost. The BBC, in its April 2024 article titled UK's most lethal tank enters testing, would claim the British Army's existing 221 Challenger 2 tanks will be slimmed down to 127 refurbished, modernized Challenger 3s. The Ministry of Defense's statement, the one that I showed you previously, claims up to 148 Challenger 3s will be handed over in total. Whether it's 148, 127, or even if they modernized every single Challenger 2 that exists, all 221, considering what we are seeing unfold in Ukraine, does anyone believe this relatively small number of tanks is relevant on a modern battlefield today? I would say not. Despite being refurbished and modernized from existing tanks, the $990 million program equates to about 6 to 8 million per tank. 6 million to 8 million US dollars per tank. Now, I'm assuming that is the money that they are spending to modernize these tanks. I don't know if it includes research and developments. Keep that as a possibility in mind. So maybe they're not quite as expensive, but it certainly seems like they are, and it seems to be in line with what the British and American military industrial base has done previously. This is several times more expensive than refurbished, modernized Russian T-72B3s, T-90Ms, or T-80 BVM tanks. and almost as expensive as Russia's newest tank, the T-14 Armata, which is believed to cost between $5 and $9 million, according to a recent Business Insider article. That is this article right here. Refurbished and modernized main battle tanks can still perform effectively on the battlefield. So I'm not really questioning the fact that the UK is modernizing their Challenger 2 tanks. I don't see anything wrong with modernizing your tanks. But as I point out here, tanks' most important characteristics are its firepower, protection, and mobility, all of which are often upgraded during modernization programs. Russia has proven refurbishment and modernization programs can field large quantities of effective armor on the battlefield. But the key to the success of such programs is that the process is done quickly and cheaply. So if you're producing a tiny number of extremely expensive modernized tanks on your already very small number of Challenger 2 tanks, that almost defeats the whole purpose of modernizing. You're supposed to save time and money by modernizing them rather than building tanks from scratch. If your tanks come out produced in tiny quantities and costing almost as much as a new tank, then your modernization program has essentially failed. Novoya Gazeta, a Western-funded media platform, in a November 2022 article titled "The Barren Barrels," would claim that Russia's tank industry was capable of producing up to 250 new vehicles and modernizing up to 600 more every single year. This is a vastly larger quantity than the total planned number of all Challenger 3 tanks up until the year 2040. Okay, that is this article here that I've referenced many, many times. And this was November 2022. And we know that Russia has increased its tank production since then. So just think about how many Russian tanks are being built and put on the battlefield. Brand new ones, the newest T90s, T90M, and also all of these refurbished, modernized tanks that are joining them in the hundreds every single year. The UK is going to have maybe 148 tanks that they've modernized, and that is all they will have until the year 2040. So let's talk about how the UK and the West in general, how they're doubling down on an obsolete design philosophy regarding their main battle tanks. There is no evidence that Britain's Challenger 3 tanks can justify their high price and low quantity. No matter how effective the tanks are, their small numbers will put them at a disadvantage in any large-scale operation with a peer or near-peer adversary. The Challenger 2 main battle tank, upon which the Challenger 3 is based, was already put to the test and performed poorly in Ukraine. Because of the overall small number of Challenger 2s in the UK's inventory, only 14 could be transferred to Ukrainian forces for use in combat. In September 2023, amid Ukraine's failing offensive, British media reported the first Challenger 2 destroyed by Russian forces, likely by a mine. That's from this article, The Guardian. British Challenger 2 tank destroyed in combat for first time, Ukrainian footage shows. Tank could be one of 14 UK gave to Ukraine that Kiev was keeping in reserve for frontline breakthrough. Well, that breakthrough never happened, did it? While there was speculation that Ukraine was holding its Challenger 2 tanks in reserve for a breakthrough amid its 2023 offensive, no such operation took place. Instead, reports claimed the Challenger 2 was being used as an expensive, heavy, and overly complex assault gun to attack frontline fortifications. So when you take a tank and instead of using it to hunt other tanks or for assault operations, and by that I mean rolling forward with armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles as an offensive force, instead you're using it as just a big mobile gun to help infantry target enemy fortifications that their weapons that they're carrying cannot. An assault gun. And as a matter of fact, Russia brought in a number of very old, antiquated tanks because they just wanted a big mobile gun that could help infantry do this. So your assault gun does not have to be fancy or complex. It just needs to be a big gun that can move around. The Challenger 2 is just simply over-engineered, oversized for that role. And by the way, the article that I cited is this one from Forbes, February 2024. Ukraine's huge and loud Challenger 2 tanks hide in tree lines, lob shells at Russian fortifications 2 miles away. Well, that sounds like a lot, but any modern main battle tank can fire a round and hit its target on the first shot from kilometers away. So that is nothing special. And I'll get to the other Forbes article that admits how poorly designed the Challenger 2 is for the situation in Ukraine. Similar reports criticize the Challenger 2 as being too heavy. Actually, let's just look at that one right now. The British Challenger 2 is the wrong tank for Ukraine. The Challenger 2 is too heavy, lacks protection, and needs too much support. So let's get into all of that. So similar reports criticize the Challenger 2 as being too heavy, lacking protection, and needing too much support. Its heavy weight combined with a relatively underpowered engine reportedly rendered the tank immobile in Ukraine's muddy terrain. The weight also poses problems in traversing bridges across the battlefield, unable to support the tank. Other Western main battle tanks using similar design philosophies suffered the same setbacks. And like other Western main battle tanks, many systems on the Challenger 2 were unnecessarily complex. For example, the tank uses hydropneumatic suspension instead of torsion bars, like most modern tanks. The complex system of suspension supposedly improves the accuracy of the main gun. The added complexity of the suspension meant more complex maintenance was required, along with larger numbers of replacement parts for repairs, complicating Ukraine's already dire logistical challenges. Because the Challenger 2 used a unique rifled main gun, as opposed to 120mm smoothbore guns used by other NATO tank designs, a separate supply of ammunition was required, making it even more difficult to sustain the tank on the battlefield. The Challenger 3 is actually heavier than the Challenger 2, but is expected to use an engine of similar size and power, meaning that traversing difficult terrain will be even more problematic, as will finding bridges capable of supporting the extra weight. The Challenger 3 will be using an upgraded version of the complex hydropneumatic suspension of the Challenger 2. One design decision that is an overall improvement is the use of a 120mm smoothbore gun, allowing the Challenger 3 to use NATO standard ammunition, easing the logistical burden of upgraded tanks on a joint operation, exercise, or battlefield. So there is at least one positive out of this Challenger 3 design. We have to remember that Russian main battle tanks all share a common gun and ammunition, and many of them share many other common components or similar components that makes manufacturing for the 3 different main battle tanks Russia is currently using in Ukraine much easier, and makes it possible to scale up production much faster for all 3 main battle tanks. This is simply impossible if your fighting force includes the Challenger 2, the M1A2, the French Leclerc, the German Leopard 2. If you have all of these tanks that all use completely different fire control and engines and running gear and suspension, it creates a logistical nightmare for any joint operation using all of these tanks. The one thing that they may have going for them is using common ammunition, but NATO artillery is supposed to use common ammunition, and we found out that it really doesn't work out that way. So maybe it's the same for tanks. Ukraine got so few tanks from the West that it really doesn't even matter. Overall, the Challenger 3 represents the doubling down on an obsolete design philosophy where smaller numbers of complex tanks were meant to gain an advantage over lower quality but more numerous enemy counterparts. Today, modern Russian main battle tanks are just as capable of firing over a range of several kilometers and hitting their target on the first shot. Because Russian main battle tanks also fire anti-tank guided missiles from their main guns, they can actually engage targets outside the range of Western tanks. So Russian main battle tanks have autoloaders. They have a 3-man crew and they have an autoloader. Western main battle tanks have a 4-man crew. One of those crew members is manually loading the gun. In that autoloader, Russia may have anti-tank guided missiles that they can load into the main gun, fire from the main gun, and hit targets much further away with greater accuracy than their tank ammunition, their 125 millimeter tank shells. But as Ukraine has proven, tank-on-tank combat is relatively rare. Both sides use highly portable anti-tank guided missiles mounted on a wide range of mobile platforms, as well as kamikaze drones in the anti-tank role. Tanks are instead used in assaults on enemy defenses and as long-range direct-fire weapons. Neither of these roles require the expensive and complex features included in either the Challenger 2 or 3's designs, and it could be argued that the Challenger 2 doesn't even perform that role well, at least not in Ukraine. Instead, because of the greater likelihood that the main battle tanks will be hit and either severely damaged or destroyed, the nation capable of producing effective tanks, the fastest and cheapest, gains an advantage in what is essentially a strategy of attrition. So let's guess who is able to do that better. Of course, Russia. The Challenger 3 represents a complete failure to learn any of these lessons. The Challenger 3, along with its other Western counterparts, including the American M1 Abrams and the German Leopard 2, represent an approach developed during decades of small wars using combined arms against poorly trained, poorly organized, and inadequately armed militants. Even in that role, the West's large, heavy, complex design philosophy began to fall prey to cheap and effective Russian anti-tank guided missiles proliferating across the world's battlefields. This culminated in 2006 when Israeli forces invaded southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was using modern Russian anti-tank weapons, RPGs, also anti-tank guided missiles, and they actually stopped Israeli armored columns trying to work their way into southern Lebanon. Essentially, the ground invasion failed because of these modern anti-tank weapons. The failure of this Western philosophy of high-tech, highly complex, extremely expensive, small numbers of armor simply stopped making sense because you're going to lose an unsustainable number of these tanks. At the very beginning of the conflict, you're not going to be able to pace yourself through an operation, through a war of attrition, essentially. The motivation to continue building upgraded versions of these large, complex, expensive main battle tanks stems mainly from a desire for financial profit rather than a focus on battlefield effectiveness. Developing an entirely new main battle tank requires large sums of money for research and development, as well as new tooling to eventually manufacture them. That could be pocketed by doing far less extensive, but also far less effective upgrades to existing tanks, no matter how inappropriate they are on a modern battlefield. In the BBC's article, it would quote Defense Secretary Grant Shapps regarding the rollout of the first Challenger 3, saying, "In a more dangerous world, the need for vehicles such as the Challenger 3 is imperative as the threats facing the UK evolve." And when you think about that statement, the existence of the Challenger 3 represents the complete opposite of that sentiment. The threats facing the UK have evolved, but the Challenger 3 represents doubling down on an old, now antiquated design philosophy. It has failed to evolve, essentially. However, the many wars and proxy wars the UK and its American and European allies have fought over the past 2 decades have all been conflicts of choice. Interventions often sold to the public based on deliberate lies regarding threats that the collective West supposedly faced. In reality, it's the profit over purpose mindset diverting public resources from infrastructure, education, and healthcare to overpriced, useless weapon programs like the imperative Challenger 3 that pose the greatest threat to the welfare and happiness of the Western public. As I often say, the special interests leading the collective West, I would say, over a cliff. They represent the greatest threat to the people of of the West. There is no external enemy that poses a greater danger to the West than its own leadership, its own special interests, who put profit above all else to the detriment of effectively running their own societies. And even these wars of choice that they choose all around the globe, they're unable to win them because they are incapable of translating this desire to control the world into a practical means to do so. They're just simply incapable of it because of their prioritizing of profit over purpose. So this is a reoccurring theme. I think we see many weapon programs across the entire West following this same philosophy. They fail to understand that the disparity that they once had over the rest of the world in terms of technology, economic power, industrial capabilities, that is gone. The playing field has leveled. Other nations are capable of making weapons as effective as the West. They also have state-owned enterprises making these weapons for a fraction of the cost of Western weapons, allowing them to just simply make many more of them. And what we see transpiring in Ukraine is a glimpse into the future of war between peer and near-peer competitors. It will become attritional, and the nation with the larger industrial base and the ability to place purpose over profit, they will prevail on the battlefield, just as Russia is prevailing on the battlefield in Ukraine. All of this is leading ultimately to a war with China regarding different types of weapon systems, not main battle tanks, but naval vessels, different types of missiles, warplanes. The US is pursuing the exact same design philosophy, with the conviction that they're better at innovating, their technology is superior, and somehow that will give them an edge over the many more numerous weapons China will have at its disposal. But even if you're reading Western analysis about Chinese weapons, there is a growing awareness that Chinese weapons are not just more numerous than Western weapons, they're also as capable, in some cases more capable. So the same situation is shaping up in the Asia-Pacific region, as has already begun unfolding in Eastern Europe. And this will continue. I will continue keeping an eye on it. I will continue analyzing these new weapon systems as they come out, give you a better, deeper understanding of them beyond the Western headlines. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Highly suggest you follow me on Telegram. Absolutely everything is posted there, including articles that I am not allowed to post on X, and videos, just in case YouTube suspends or closes my channel. Everything will be on Telegram. Check the video description below for all of the links that I referenced in this video about my article that I've written for New Eastern Outlook. The link to that will be in a pinned comment at the top of the comment section. There are also ways in the video description below where you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my other social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has been helping, whether it's one-time donations month to month, or people who have no resources to spare but are sharing my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what helps make this work possible. So thank you for that, and as always, thank you for watching.